So we're learning the haTeshuva of the Alter Rebbe. We're in the middle of Perek Daled. We're in the bottom, towards the bottom of page Tzadik Daled, the third line from the bottom where the words begin towards the end of the line, Ubir Ha'inyan. And just to refresh our memories, the Alter Rebbe in this chapter, in continuation of explaining the 3 steps of tshuva. What is tshuva? The Alter Rebbe says tshuva hi azivas hachet bilvad min haTorah. Biblical tshuva, Torah tshuva, is forsaking sin, making a resolution, I will not do this sin again. That is Baal Teshuva 101. You need no salt, you need no pepper, you need no flavoring. You need to stop doing that act that was a violation of Hashem's commandments in any way. Nevertheless, the second stage of tshuva, to polish up the tshuva, to make the tshuva a shining tshuva, what's required is kapara. Kapara means, we translate kapara as forgiveness, but the Alter Rebbe says kapara is associated with the word kinuach, like kinuach suda, to wash down the food that's eaten. Kinuach, to wash away, to wipe away the stain that was caused by the sin. The third stage, the Alter Rebbe said, even after doing kapara, which he calls in Tanya here, in Igeres haTeshuva, shleimus haTeshuva, completion of tshuva, wholesome tshuva. The third idea is merutza. Merutza means being favorable in the eyes of Hashem. Like the korban oila, which was brought not for a sin offering. For a sin offering, Avram, you brought a korban chatos, a chatos sacrifice to atone for sin. But after that, you still felt you wanted to give Hashem a present, a gift, a doiron. That's the korban oila. And so too, we, even after we do tshuva iser, and we do kapara, we still want to find favoritism, in a sense, in Hashem's eyes. For that, you need to bring him a gift. What's the gift? Karbonis. Today that we don't have sacrifices karbonis, in lieu of that, it's fasting. However, the fasting was only applicable in days when people were strong enough to fast. The Alter Rebbe says, in our day, and he's referring to his days, and surely in our day today, we're weak. We're not strong enough. Our physical composure isn't strong enough to do excessive fasts. And he enumerates the number of fasts that the Arizal writes that are required for certain transgressions. And if you do them multiple times, some say you have to fast those amount of times. Some say only once, and the compromise is to do it 3 times. So he cites the transgression of wasting semen, in Hebrew. And the Arizal says that that's the Pei Daled Tainiyos, 84 fasts. If you did it 50 times, it would be 50 times 84 according to one opinion. According to the other opinion, 1 time 84, and the compromise is 3 times 84, which is Reish Nun Beis 252. Even that is very difficult. So he suggested doing that in the winter when the days are short and you can eat up to 3 hours before sunrise, and therefore you could, he says, accomplish 9-10 fasts or so during a winter, And if you do it over 10 several years, you'll get the number 252. And Alter Rebbe says, or you could do 2 half days. 2 half days are equivalent to 1 half day, to 1 full day. 2 half days in the winter. But the Alter Rebbe says, nevertheless, you still need to have strength to even do that. So the answer, and since we don't, so by and large, it doesn't diminish the fact that it's still to accomplish the 3rd stage of tshuva, which is being favorable in Hashem's eyes. This is necessary, but there's another substitution for it. It's called tzedakah. How much tzedakah? Says the Alter Rebbe, laharbis me'oid mi'oid. A lot of tzedakah. How much? 10%, 5%, 20%. Says the Alter Rebbe, as much as you can, even above 20%. And don't be concerned about the statement in Chazal, don't splurge more than 20%. Because the Alter Rebbe says that's when things are normal. But if someone, God forbid, is ill, spiritually ill, and in this case, for transgressions, we become spiritually ill, just as you take whatever amount of medicine is necessary to cure yourself from, God forbid, a physical illness, surely when it comes to spiritual illness, any amount of tzedakah, the more, the better is acceptable. In chapter 4, the Alter Rebbe addresses the issue, a question. And he says, we mentioned earlier that for certain sins, which the Torah says, you're mechuyev, you're obligated, koris, excision, which is to die before the age of 50, or misa b'dei shemayim, heavenly death, which is death before the age of 60, he says we find many people who we know commit such transgressions and they live many more years than 50 and 60. So the Alter Rebbe is asking here the age-old question, do good things happen to bad people? And how do you reconcile that? So what we're learning now in chapter 4 isn't just a narrow question, Baruch. It's a very broad question, one that is relevant to all of Judaism, to all of Torah. How do you reconcile what Torah says and what we see? If the Torah says that for this and this particular transgression, you will die before 50, and you live to 75, something's wrong, or seemingly wrong. This is what he's addressing in this chapter and in the following chapters. To understand this, he goes back. He takes us back, and he says, he goes back actually to a thought that we learned in chapter 2 of Tanya. What is the neshama? Chelek elika mimal mamash. Here, the Alter Rebbe doesn't quote those words, but on page 186, towards the bottom, he quotes the Pasach Chelek Hashem Amoi, for a part of God is his nation, Chevel Nachlosei, the rope of his inheritance. And he says that the name of God is expressed in the neshama, Chelek B'Shem Hashem. The soul is part of the Shem Hashem. And this is a very enigmatic statement, Isser. What do you mean the soul, the neshama, is a part of Shem Hashem? If you recall the language used in chapter 2 of Avram and Tanya, it doesn't use that language. It says, Chelek Eloka Mimal Mamosh. Here the Alter Rebbe doesn't use those words, and he's referring to the same idea, seemingly. Here he uses the word at the bottom of page 186, Chelek Mishem Hashem. It's very different wording, and it has a very different meaning. And this is what he begins exploring on page Tzadik Dalet. What is the meaning of Chelek Mishem Hashem? In other words, let's now paraphrase what he's saying here. Baruch, he's saying here like this, that the neshama that Hashem gave to every Yid, the nefesh elikis, the chelek elika mimal mamish, it's chelek mishem Hashem. Why does he say Shem Hashem? Chelek Hashem. Like he said in Pei Beis. When you see this, Isser, you have to stop and ask yourself. He's referring to seemingly the same idea, and he quotes a pasuk, and in the pasuk it doesn't say the word shame, and the Alter Rebbe inserts, right after quoting part of the verse, Chelek Mishem Hashem Baruch Hu. Who's talking about the Shem Hashem? Shem Hashem means what? Yud Kei Vav Kei. What does it mean, Avram, that the neshama is part of Yud Kei Vav Kei? This is something we haven't had yet in Tanya. Surely not in chapter 2 of Tanya. That idea is not mentioned in chapter 2 in Tanya. So only in Igeres HaKodesh, chapter Dalet, does he introduce to us a new idea. A new idea that seemingly refers to the same idea that he mentioned in chapter 2 of Tanya, first section of Tanya, Likutei Amorim. Here, he adds the word Chelek Mishem Hashem. This is what the Alter Rebbe now explores. And he starts explaining, the difference between a neshama and all other heavenly creations, including malachim, the angels, the malachim, who we so praise, and we so admire, and we so laud, are yet but a creation of God. And I'll spill the beans to you. What is a neshama? Not a creation of God, part of God. There's an expression in the Rebbe Rashab's Chasidism that says it this way, which is very worth knowing. That a neshama is elokus shenase nivra. It's godliness that is formed to become creature. It's not elikus sheboire nivra that creates a creation. It's godliness that's formed. The same piece of godliness is formed to become nivra. What we understand from this is that the neshama is God. It's God in a different format. There is God, Hashem, as the creator. There is God that transcends being the creator, being the only reality, which is even greater than God, the creator. Because once you say God is the creator, you're limiting him to creation, and God transcends creation. Right? So God is transcendent. And part of transcendence is creation as well. But God transcends through creation. When we say Chelek Elika, Hashem, one second, Hashem, that the neshama is elokus shenase nivra, what we're saying ostensibly is that the soul is God. Do you understand what we're saying here? I once heard a chassid speak about this. I have it on a tape. He speaks about it in Yiddish, and I was listening to it, and I'm like blown away. It like hit me then, and now when I'm relearning it now in Tanya here, he wasn't explaining it here. He was talking to someone who was questioning him about the meditation necessary at Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And he says, you know what that means? When you say Shema, you have God in yourself. You have God in yourself? You're a God? What do you mean we're a God? That's the vort. That's the idea. That the neshama is a God. It's a chelik of God. It's a part of God, but it's God. So when you look at this from this vantage point, the question is, how can a name, which seems to be so external in comparison to the essence, contain God? That's what bothers the Alter Rebbe over here. Baruch, you hear? How can you say that the Shem Hashem, the name Yud Kei Vav Kei with the 4 letters, is demonstrative, or better said, is God? It's a name. And to this, the Alter Rebbe says we need to understand the difference between the soul, the neshama, and malachim. And he says, you're right, when it comes to even angels and all other heavenly hosts, and surely earthly material matter, they are only but a byproduct of God, i.e. a creation of God. Whereas the neshama is the essence. And to prove that, he uses the difference between Vayipach Hashem Nishbas Chaim. Hashem blew within Adam, within the nostrils, he blew within the neshama. So he makes the difference, which he also brought in chapter 2 in Tanya, the difference between blowing, exhaling, and speaking. Where speaking, you can speak endlessly and not be tired, whereas exhaling, very quickly, you become tired. And why is that? Because it comes from the inside. You need to inhale to exhale. In other words, the neshama that Hashem gave Adam, blew within Adam, comes from what we call the pnimius, the innermost aspect of God. Yes, Isser.
What I wanted to say is that it follows logically if the neshama is a part of the Shema Meforish, of the Hayavayiyah, it follows that the neshama is eternal.
I understand, but this isn't a puzzle. One follows the other. One piece follows. What's the logic? Seemingly, the logic doesn't equal because it doesn't make sense. The Shem Hashem is already a limitation. Yud Kei Vav Kei. It could be the greatest of the 7 names, but nevertheless, it's still a name. It's still a shame. And the proof is that it consists of 4 letters, as we're going to see soon. So So the question is, how is it? So what you're saying, it is that way. Okay? Yeshikoyach. True. The question is, how does it make sense? Seemingly, the Yud Kei Vav Kei restricts the neshama, and we're talking about a endless, a limitless neshama, a transcendent neshama. How does the Shem Hashem have the ability to, on one hand, retain its 4 letters with all of the limitations associated to it, together with a transcendent God that's greater than the Shem Hashem? That's what he seeks to explain. And the beginning of his explaining is that the neshama comes from the pnimius. The soul comes from the pnimius of Hashem, expressed in the Yud Kei Vav Kei, but not bound by the Yud Kei Vav Kei. Now you hear what I just said, Avram? The neshama expresses God, but is not bound by God. Now that sounds very like, it sounds like an oxymoron. If you express something, you believe in something, you live with something, how is it that you're not restricted and confined to it? That's the amazing idea of the neshama. That just as God is transcendental, the soul is transcendental. Transcendental means that it's here in the physical, yet it's not limited and bound by the physical. Let's see this idea inside now. Page Sadik Dalid, the bottom. Or be in 3 lines from the bottom, the last 2 words. To further clarify this, we can understand this based on what's known from the saying of Eliyahu in the introduction to what's called Tikkun Zohar. We say this every Friday. That is Chasidism, who say Pasach Eliyahu before Haidu, Friday before Mincha. Unto the Pikas Asar Tikkunin, you God, unto you. The Pikas makes come forward. Asar Tikkunin, 10 corrective measures, which mean and literally means 10 garments. V'korin and lohoin, and we call to thee, we give a name to these 10 eses sfiron, the 10 emanations. The 10 spheres. And the purpose of these 10 that emerge from Hashem, you're the one that allows for the emergence of 10 garments, i.e. 10 spheres, 10 emanations. The purpose is lanhoga v'hoin, it is to conduct with them, with the 10, almin stimin, next page, top of 188, v'chuli, the concealed worlds, and v'almin disgalien, he says, etc., but it refers to the revealed worlds. Everything in the world goes through the 10 emanations. Continuing. And Chakim, he gives, for example, and Eliyahu gives us an example. And Chakim, you are wise. However, v'lo b'chochma yediyah, you are not knowable through chochma. One does not know you and grasp you and have you only through chochma, although you possess chochma, wisdom, creativity. So too, ant maven, you Hashem are a maven. You understand. You have the virtue of bina. However, v'lo bevina yediyah v'chuli, but not that you are caught in the web of bina. V'chol hayud sfiris, and all of the 10 emanations, nichlolis v'nirmozos b'shem havaya baruch hu, are incorporated and alluded to in the holy name, the tetragrammaton of Yud Kei Vav Kei, blessed be He. So the Alter Rebbe says, and this is predicated, Yoini, on the statement of Eliyahu that we read Friday night. How many of you have ever taken the time to look and translate and understand what are we saying there? Are we just reading Kabbalah? It's not a time to read Kabbalah, it's a time for prayer. Prayer means I want to understand what I'm saying so I can pray, I can feel. Well, what are we saying here? So we learn this piece of Tanya here, we have a beginning understanding of what we're saying. And what are we saying? That Hashem allowed and wanted His essence to be expressed through 10 emanations called the spheros, but He's not limited to those emanations. He uses them for the betterment of creation, but He's not limited by them. So now the question is, how is it that the 10 emanations are expressed through the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, and eventually he'll explain that the Yud Kei Vav Kei is part of us. We have the Yud Kei Vav Kei. So he has to explain first what they are. And he says, Ki Yud shu b'chinas nekuda levad, the Yud, which is only a nekuda, a point, miramezes lechochmasa yizbarich. This alludes to the emanation called chochma, creativity. Shehu b'bchinas helen v'hester, which is concealed, koidim shebo lebchinas ispashtus v'gilui asoga v'avona, prior to coming to the state of expansiveness and revelation through comprehension and understanding. Right? You're thinking about something, Yaini, you have an idea, you don't know the idea, it resonates, and it resonates. But when you try to articulate the idea, you don't have it. You don't have the words, you don't have the thought yet. But you know that this idea is a good one. That's chokhmah, creativity. You created the idea, but the expansion of the idea, which is bina, you don't have yet. So chokhmah, in comparison to bina, the Alter Rebbe says, Yisr, is behelem vehester. It's concealed. It's concealed from expansiveness. It's before expansion. So the state of chokhmah is very silent and very quiet, or, as he says here, hidden. Then comes bina. Bina baruch is development. Now, mind you, when I said before chokhmah was very silent, it happens to be the power of creativity lends itself towards what we call excitement on one hand. But it's an excitement that's concealed. You know, people, when they have good ideas, they don't share them yet. Not only because they're afraid someone else will steal their idea, Avram, but because the idea is germinating, you know. It's just budding. It's just coming into fruition. It is too early. It doesn't have to reveal itself, because the tendency of idea is concealment. Helen vehester. Only when you take idea and develop idea and expand the idea do you have now pleasure. Tainug, Chasidism says, is associated with bina. Why? Because only when you expand and you develop do you have pleasure. Tainug is associated with bina. Chokhmah is beyond expansion, therefore it's beyond tainug. By chokhmah, the Gemara says, Tzovu Padim de Rebbe Lozer, when he found Tosefta Chadadata, a new Tosefta, his face lit up. But it's different than Tainuk. Chasidis goes further and says there's Pnimius HaTainuk and Chitzonius HaTainuk. I'm not going to go into that right now. But as far as the context here is concerned, Alter Rebbe says that the shame of Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Yud is demonstrative of Chokhmah. Skip the brackets now, please. And after Chokhmah expands itself and reveals itself through comprehension, le'almin stimin, to the concealed worlds, nichleles v'nirmezes, it is incorporated and alluded to be'ois hey, in the first hey of the Yud Kei Vav Kei, of the name of the holy name of 26 Yud Kei Vav Kei. How? Sheyesh lo pchinas ispashtus leroichev. The hey has expansion. It's not just a little dot, a yud, but it has expansion leroichev in its width. Hamoyre merames, which denotes and alludes al harchovas abir vehavana. It alludes to the expansion of explanation, the elaboration, and its understanding. That is what we call reichev, the width of the idea. The gam le'oirech, and also the length of the idea, hamoira, which denotes al pchinas amshacha. It refers to the drawing down, v'ashpo milmaila limata, and receiving the influence from above to below, alman's demon, even to the concealed worlds. So in other words, Bina is represented by the hay. Why the hay? Because the hay is no longer an akuda. The hay has a line above, a line below, and a middle. In other words, the hay has oirech and reichev, we call. Right? Width, oirech, and reichev, in this case, oirech, length. In other words, there's hands and feet here. It isn't just a point, a geometric point, which is beyond comprehension. No, you have a full picture here. This is why Bina is able to inspire Alman's demon, even Alman's Stephen, concealed worlds. Because Alman's demon, the concealed worlds, or let's say the subconscious, usually relates more to the chokhmah, the geometric point, the flash, the intuitive flash. But to make the subconscious become conscious, that takes expansion. That takes development. That takes the hay. So we'll stop here, but so far the Alter Rebbe shared with us and explained to us the first two letters of the Yud Kei Vav Kei, what they represent. And we'll continue tomorrow. And actually tomorrow we're going to have a farbrengen for the Rebbe's Yortzeit, Gimel Tammuz. And Wednesday and Thursday we'll finish the chapter, Bli Neder. So please tell those that didn't come to share today and others to join us in honor and respect of the Rebbe, the 30th Yortzeit. Tomorrow we'll farbreng together. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.